In this video, I'll continue sharing money from the last episode. Feel free to watch the first episode of this video for a better understanding. Let's get started. Since 2008, the economy has been on life support. A decade of ultra-low interest rates, which essentially made borrowing money free of charge, has caused market distortions so large that they have compounded the entire problem. When private banks make risky bets and incur losses, central banks can rescue them with their infinite wallet. As you will see, we must repay these debts. All of the money that is being created is similar to that piece of paper with the promise on it, except that it is signed by all of us, and we agreed to repay it through taxation for ourselves and future generations. It should be remembered that governments do not genuinely support the people. Instead, the people support governments through taxation. Taxation and trading are the two most common ways for governments to generate revenue, which is then used to repay central bank loans with interest. So, when governments use central banks to bail out private banks for hazardous behavior, the governments are left with debt that must eventually be repaid by taxpayers. To summarize, private banks create the great bulk of money, 97%, and they do so through making loans, which is debt. The process is as simple as entering numbers into a computer. Banks can spend and gamble with consumer deposits to some extent since they legally own them. Too large to fail banks are backed up by the central bank, creating a moral hazard. And that leads us to the last and craziest method of making money. Central bank electronic currency. Quantitative easing, sometimes known as QE, is the third type of money. The Japanese central bank created quantitative easing, a new type of currency in 1989. The Federal Reserve in the United States later made it popular during the 2008 financial crisis. When a central bank engages in quantitative easing, loans are directly made to the banking industry, major corporations, and most recently the general population. In times of dramatic occurrences like the financial crisis of 2008, it's a means to inject money into the economy. As a result, in trying to sustain the economy for a little while longer, the central bank's balance sheets have entirely spiraled out of control. The $700 billion bailout of QE in 2008 during the crisis, and the first time this was undertaken outside of Japan, was immensely problematic. It was expected to be a one-time emergency, but the Federal Reserve was unable to reverse it over the next decade. To give you an idea of how momentous all of this was, from the founding of America in 1776 to 2008, the country was in debt for less than $1 trillion. By 2014, that figure had risen to $4 trillion. In the 3 months since the start of the hidden pandemic, $3 trillion have been added. What particular mechanism does this money use to enter the system? Central banks use their magic funds to buy the corresponding number of bonds from the government. They achieve this through making use of the bond market, which was created to lend money to businesses and governments. The bond market is bigger, despite the fact that the stock market gets more attention. So, exactly what is a bond? For the purposes of this video, it is essentially the same as debt, but it is issued by a government or business. Without any savings, central banks can create money to buy these bonds. Here is a crucial question. Could a central bank go for bankruptcy? In accordance with a report released by the European Central Bank in 2016, the ability of central banks to create new money protects them from going bankrupt. If this seems unfair, please wait a while. Governments in our present situation are caught between a rock and a hard place. They can't raise money except by increasing taxes, but they owe central banks trillions of dollars. The borrowed funds are expected to jump-start the economy. But something else is going on. central banks buy bonds issued by governments or firms, they might end up controlling a large portion of the world's assets. For example, the Japanese central bank's balance sheet is larger than Japan's whole GDP. They possess 80% of their stock market. That's right, the Central Bank of Japan is the largest stakeholder in their stock market. The Swiss central bank owns $90 billion in American stocks such as Apple, Microsoft, Google, and Amazon. I couldn't believe it was legal when I first heard about it a few years ago. So these central banks are creating money out of thin air and cannot fail, yet they are purchasing actual things. Even a young person can perceive that there is something wrong here. It turns out they're making money out of thin air, and buying stuff has implications. Such central bank manipulations detach stock markets from reality. Throughout the 20th century, the stock market used to mirror the economy. However, it has since become entirely out of whack, with the U.S. stock market becoming nearly twice as large as the entire nation's GDP, which makes no sense. 30 million Americans lost their jobs on April 2020, while the stock market had its best month since 1987. The primary cause of this was central bank assistance. While the real economy received no assistance, the central bank produced trillions of dollars and distributed them to banks and hedge funds at interest rates of practically 0%. This money went directly into the stock market. Inflation is a result of money printing, as we explained before. Why then haven't we witnessed it yet? We have observed global inflation in stock markets and house prices. All of these assets eventually receive the printed money, driving up prices. As a result, there is no growth in the real economy, but a small number of people who possess significant amounts of stocks become absurdly wealthy. The wealthy prosper while the underprivileged suffer. Many people can sense and observe the wealth inequality, but many are unaware of its causes. Since the 1980s, the higher ranks of society's wealth has been linked to the stock market. Since the economy was placed on life support in 2008, the stock market has been wedded to the Federal Reserve. The more they print, the higher the stock market rises and they gain richer. Their wealth has increased 420% since 1980. When central banks issue money, the earliest users of that newly printed money enjoy improved living standards at the expense of the later owners of that money when inflation has taken hold. This is known as the Cantillon effect. According to experts, genuine inflation in the overall economy won't start until the wealthy start selling their stocks and real estate to buy other assets in hard times, and until the money velocity, or the pace at which money changes hands in the economy, starts to rise up. There is so much more to this, but for now, I'll stop here. In summary, central banks cannot go bankrupt since they have no savings, but they may produce an endless supply of money by purchasing government bonds. A bond is an exchange of cash for the guarantee that the government will later repay it with interest. This cash must ultimately be repaid by the country's future residents through taxes or inflation. Then what do we do? It is obvious that those who have lost their jobs need assistance. Although it's just my view, I believe that printing money is simply a temporary fix. The actual answer was found in the past. For example, banks should have provided loans to small and medium-sized firms, entrepreneurs, education, manufacturing, innovation, research and development, and other constructive areas of society decades ago instead of excessive home financialization and gambling. Just consider how different the world would be now if banks had invested hundreds of billions of dollars in these types of ventures rather than in real estate, gambling, or the future value of commodities. Imagine it. In the long run, the advantages lead to more jobs, more innovation, greater competitiveness, and higher living standards. Governments may also raise more revenue from these incomes without necessarily raising taxes, so it's riskier for the banks. These additional taxes from the usually higher level of life can subsequently be used to fund social programs that aid people who are in genuine need. Although money can be printed, wealth cannot. However, focusing on wealth development and productivity requires time, effort, and hard labor, and it appears that many nowadays do not have the desire for it. And, to be honest, it's too late for this alternative. All of our economies would be substantially less vulnerable if we focused on subsidizing wealth development before COVID attacks. Most individuals and organizations would have sufficient savings to write it off, as they did in the late 20th century. But for the time being, we'll have to cope with the repercussions of a frail system. So, what will happen next? In my opinion, all of this will lead to something really enormous and horrible over the next decade. I'm not sure how it will turn out. However, it may result in enormous inflation and sluggish economic progress. This is referred to as stagflation. This occurred in the 1970s, but it is possible that it will be much worse this time due to enormous debt and societal instability. The conventional assumption is that the world will eventually lose faith in the US dollar. Despite this, some macroeconomists believe that the US dollar will gain in value as other countries strive to sell their goods or trade sinking currencies for the US dollar, since it is the cleanest economy in a world of falling economies. This is referred to as the dollar milkshake theory. Some believe that digital stable coins will be able to solve a wide range of issues. Others claim that nations can print endless sums of money as long as they continue to produce enough products to pay the interest on the government's debt to the central banks. The idea here is that the debt itself does not have to be repaid, only the interest. This is known as modern monetary theory. I don't think anyone can comment on whether or not this will work, because it has never been attempted before, but I can't help but think this is another weak solution. So, what can the individual do? Obviously, I am unable to provide financial advice. That's something I'm not qualified for. However, it may be worthwhile to consider transferring part of your money into non-debt assets. If you're older, you might consider gold as a type of insurance. No central bank has the ability to print gold. Bank of America and even Goldman Sachs are the last people on the planet to hear you and think positively. I've seen gold's potential, and it's being referred to as the money of last resort. For years, other central banks, such as China and Russia, have been buying gold at unprecedented levels. I believe they are aware of what is about to happen. If you are young, you may be connected to cryptocurrencies. Governments and the banking system are now taking technology seriously. If you're feeling very brave, you can play the central bank's game against them. Investigate and invest in assets that you believe will rise in value. Finally, I cannot tell you what to do here. You must think for yourself and conduct research to choose what you believe is best. The creation of money and the broader financial system appear to be insane, and individuals have begun to recognize that the system is no longer functional. Nobody has ever questioned the monetary system since it is so embedded and pervasive. When things started to go bad, they pointed out what was apparent. Things that appear to be issues going into detail that you can see and understand. People would blame capitalism on the surface, but when you dig deeper, you can see it's an unfortunate and untimely combination of the debt-based system. Extreme financialization, moral risks, along with a pervasive Cantillon effect, are causing extreme instability and massive wealth inequality. Remember to subscribe so you won't miss wicked information in upcoming videos.